All right, we're going to jump in here. Welcome everyone to CFO Focus Live, where our CFO guests are invited to share their stories. I'm Lai-DuMone. You may know me from my TEDx talk as CEO of Worksmart Advantage, where I help teams learn to use creativity as a strategic tool, or as author of What If Pigs Can Fly, How to Follow Your Curiosities. And today I'm your host. And our featured guest today is Adam Townsend, the former Chief Financial Officer and Chief People Officer at Vizio, the smart TV and soundbar company. Adam built his finance career at CBS and Showtime before joining Vizio as Chief Financial Officer. In that role, he led Vizio through its initial public offering on the New York Stock Exchange during the COVID-19 pandemic. And later, as both CFO and Chief People Officer, he helped guide the company through his multi-billion-dollar sale to Walmart. So Adam's here today to share his experience, particularly in how he managed attracting and retaining top talent in that dual role. Welcome, Adam.
Good to be here. Nice to see you, Vaughn.
You
Thanks
too.
everyone for joining.
Yes, and rather than asking you how you're doing, how about giving us 3 words to describe how you feel about life right now?
Oh, gosh, a nice icebreaker. Look, I mean, there's so much going on everywhere. It feels like that movie, We're All Living in Everything Everywhere All at Once, or is that the title? Something like that. Because it feels like that. There's so much going on around technology and social dynamics and geopolitical. And it's just like it's easy for the head to spin really quickly. So if I had to narrow it down to sort of 3 words to try to describe, I'd say first, I'd be lying if I didn't say anxious. I mean, there's a lot of anxiety of like what's going on. How do we know what the future is going to bring? What is that all going to look like? How do we guide our kids? I've got kids that are entering college soon and thinking about their futures. There's just a lot of anxiety kind of sitting around. But then what comes with that is also a word that you use a lot, which is curiosity.
Yeah.
It's an incredible time to be learning and figuring out new technologies and what's the future going to look like. And so it's really exciting. And if you have a natural curiosity, there's never been a time like this to really kind of take in what you want to and be able to explore. But on the back of that has to be, I think the third word would be hopeful. Hopeful that things come around. Obviously, the pendulum swings in both directions too far often. And I think you got to be hopeful that we land in a good place on some of these uncertainties and really utilize what's at our resources today to do something really extraordinary for the future. So that's the best way I can sort of boil it down.
That's awesome. So anxious, curious, and hopeful. And oftentimes when people say anxious, it also means excitement. So I think all the words together that you said really just lead to new possibilities. I think that's truly where you are in life right now. Okay,
Yeah.
so now
All
let's
right.
get to the easy questions. So as CFO at Vizio, you guided the company through the IPO process during COVID. Then, in addition to the CFO role, you took on the role of CPO, spearheading the acquisition by Walmart. That's a lot. And with all of that in those 2 roles, there must have been a lot of uncertainty for employees during that time. So I want to ask you, how do you manage to engage and retain talent during that period?
Yeah, it's a great question. Let me put a little context on what you're talking about. So when we engaged with Walmart, that started a 6-month process of sort of going back and forth and figuring out how can we do things together commercially. And those conversations is what ended up leading to the idea that they should just own us outright. It's a weird process to go through with your largest customer because you just don't know, that dance of M&A has really been awkward, especially if they have a lot of control over the output of your product. So our team was stressed in a lot of ways. So we spent 6 months doing brainstorming sessions. How do we grow together? What does this look like? And then as it moved into negotiations around an M&A process, that was like a whole nother 3 or 4 month process. That was more detailed around, sort of diligence and really understanding the puts and takes of what this could look like. And it was big stress on the team. Walmart has M&A teams that are specifically for transactions. So they have a whole M&A HR group. Obviously, Vizio doesn't have that. So for Vizio, it was the same people doing their day jobs and doing a lot of the work needed to help support the transaction. Once we got the deal done, everyone felt good about it, except we went into a 9-month-long FTC review process, which again was the same team having to do a heavy lift around that and working closely with our counterparts on our legal team. So as Chief Financial Officer and Chief People Officer, thinking about keeping the team engaged doing their day job. We were still a public company until the deal closed, right? So we had to do all of the normal stuff and all this extra work. And so I think the key tool that we used was to recognize that people's lives were really being impacted by this. We went in and created a retention bonus program. And I thought we were pretty thoughtful about how we approached that. So we recognized that their day-to-day was going to change, but we also had to keep them tied in for longevity because we had to get through the transaction. So we ended up creating a bonus pool, and we approached them with this pool, and we broke it up into two buckets. We gave them 25% of the bonus pool up front to recognize, hey, there's going to be more on your plate. We appreciate everything you're doing. And then the remainder would come 2 months after the deal closed. And that runway piece was also really important because it allowed us to let them look at what it meant to be inside of Walmart, what opportunities might come from that, and not just only be thinking about sort of getting, severance package or exiting, because obviously the finance and accounting org is going to be one that gets integrated pretty quickly. We wanted them to have a chance to say, what might it be? What opportunities might exist to work for Walmart? And that 2 month period really served them well. And I think it served us well because it maintained the continuity. So that was really the biggest tool that we used to keep people engaged and felt sort of rewarded and part of the process and keep the business moving.
That's so smart because in the bottom, at the end of the day, really people are asking like, what's in it for me? Right. They, of course, they want to be helpful to the company, but with something like this, where you're doing your job and then also doing a completely other thing, the what's in it for me. So you address that with the bonus pool. And then also the idea of giving them 25% upfront was really brilliant. And then also this idea of like, helping them secure their future. Like what at Walmart, what positions at Walmart might they want to be involved with? So really innovative, really creative.
Yeah, Walmart's so big that I wanted them to get a chance to look and see there might be other things to do if their role in Vizio was eliminated, because there's so many other opportunities. And so give them a chance to sort of experience that was really important.
And for you as a CFO to say like, we see this for you, helps them see it for themselves.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, so let's take a step back here. I'm curious, how do you come on to take on the role of Chief People Officer on top of your CFO role? I'm sure everyone who's listening in here go like, I don't know how you even do one of those roles, much less both of them. So how'd that happen?
Yeah, look, it came to me after the successful IPO. We were in a really rapid ramp up phase for the company. We were going to be growing our engineering and software development org substantially. We were really kind of on a pace to hire 4 engineers a day for 90 days. So as you think about that, obviously a massive investment in overhead. And I think the idea was to pull together CFO and CPO under one roof, create more holistic perspective and to help us with planning, prioritization, capital allocation, road mapping. And I think it really served that. I mean, at first I was a little bit resistant because it's just a whole nother discipline. Like I didn't necessarily want to have on my plate. Arguably the two riskiest parts of an organization, the money and the people, right? Yeah. And so a lot to take on, but I was fortunate to have good support and good infrastructure around that. But I think I learned a lot about it, putting it in one place to be able to think about it holistically and how we're allocating capital to really serve the business. That perspective, I think, is really, really critical to an organization.
Absolutely. And so in my work, I work with a lot of CPOs. And what I can say is a lot of CPO initiatives can be limited by financing and budgets set by the CFO. So how did taking on the role of CPO change the way you operate as a CFO?
Well, definitely created a lot of personal arguments with myself, trying to serve both constituents, right? Not easy. So that natural conflict existed, but it existed in one spot, which was pretty helpful. I agree with you. Like the whole CFO no issue is a big one for organizations, right? And it's easy as CFO when you're solving for one particular thing, which is the financial bottom line. It's very easy to want to be the roadblock to investment in people, and your team leaders coming to you saying, "I need more resources, I need more help." It's easy to just sort of put the stop on that, and then the numbers work much better, right? I think the evolution of that was the thinking around, if you think about investing in people as an asset, right? And that asset has to generate a return, right? And so you think about if someone's going to come to you and want more people, the first question is, what are those people going to do for you, and how does that generate a return for the company? And so when you put those two things together, it makes it easier as the CFO to see the benefit of that investment. And then I could sort of justify what that was going to look like. Clearly, you got to put some guardrails in. You need to be thoughtful about the timing and sequencing. And I think an open dialogue with business leaders really helps that, so they understand kind of what you're trying to solve. It's not just this closed door dynamic, but you're also helping be a partner to them, because you do want the organization to grow. You do want to generate that return that I'm talking about. And people help them do that, but they themselves need to be thinking about it in the right way also. And so I think that open dialogue really did it. And because it was in one spot, it was one conversation. You didn't start to create a cultural dynamic where people go to one person and try to get an answer and then come back with that answer to influence the other person. It was really one conversation. And given the pace of our growth and acceleration, it helped us be more agile and nimble through that process.
Absolutely. Well, I think clearly both roles there's a lot of weight on both roles. And I'm sure it was an interesting perspective for you to get to play both roles. And I'm sure that'll carry on into whatever you do next as well.
Definitely helped me grow as a broader executive, for sure, because the perspective it brings is much broader. You have to think in a different way than just solving for one particular task.
Yeah, I think maybe other companies should take that on and be like, have people play each other's roles.
Like
different perspectives, right? Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so let's get a quick 30-second answer to this one. In 2020 and 2021, you were in the IPO readiness stage at Vizio. So what are a couple of things you would tell yourself to do differently in terms of people management during that time?
Well, gosh, I mean, we were in the middle of the pandemic, right? So a unique circumstance. But I think because my mandate was to take the company public within the first year of arriving. And coming from my world of mostly public company background and Wall Street, I think it was just known to me why you want to go public, what the benefits of being public are, and what that looks like. And the organization was not in the same place. So I think the education of what it means to be public was probably something I could have invested more heavily into, to kind of educate people on what that looks like. I think there's a natural tendency of people to think, I'm being told like, oh, I can't do my job the same way anymore. I must be doing it wrong. And it's not that you're doing it wrong. It's that you need to do it differently as a public company. And there's a learning curve there that requires investment. And we're probably moving too fast to make that proper investment. And some people kind of got run over in that process. But that would be what I would say, like invest early in educating people of what it means.
What a great lesson too, because oftentimes at like the C-suite level, you're making these big decisions thinking like, oh, everyone understands it, but likely no one understands it, right? So you have to go back to the
That's right.
So really good lesson there. Okay, so a common challenge in any business is attracting and retaining talent. And Vizio operates in a very competitive space up against like giants like Samsung. So how do you navigate that competitive marketplace and that labor market?
Yeah, it was really tough, especially in that time frame we're talking about. The demand for labor was incredibly intense. As I said earlier, we were ramping up our engineering and software development organization, which means you're competing not just against endemic competitors in your space, but across the entire spectrum. So a lot of the people we're competing for were going to Meta or Google or Netflix, really big names where we were never going to be the top payer. There was no chance that Vizio was in a place to be the top payer. The pay packages I was seeing go to people from Meta were just extraordinary. But what we did understand is that we were a different company and that we would have to articulate sort of what it would mean to work for us in a different way. And what I mean by that is we could really genuinely look people in the eye and say, hey, look, at this organization, at your role or your level, you're going to have a bigger seat at the table. You're going to have exposure to senior leadership in a much more one-to-one or closer way than you would ever have at, say, Meta or Google, right? You're just not going to get that exposure there. There's no open door policy to the CEO to go in and say hello or have a conversation. And you're going to see and learn things in a much more rapid way. And for the right people, that was attractive, that they liked that and they were willing to make a trade. Going back to being the chief people officer at the same time, I had to think about our comp structure and what were we really offering? How can we be competitive? It wasn't going to just be dollars on the page. It was going to be some of these other things. And an example of that was, when it came to our PTO policy, we obviously recognize all of the major holidays throughout the year, but we also wanted to show employees that we cared culturally and were sensitive and open to them. And how that showed up was that we would add 2 floating holidays a year that people could use to celebrate whatever they care about. So the company doesn't have to necessarily align to trying to recognize every single important holiday or celebration throughout the year, but we let people know, you take the time off if something's important to you. That's a day for you and your family, go do it. And I think that was a goodwill gesture that a lot of people reacted really well to. So it's those little things that can kind of differentiate. Otherwise, if people are just purely looking at dollars on the page, very, very hard.
Absolutely. And I think that's so smart in any area of our lives, right? Whether it's business or personal life, like to differentiate yourself on what makes you unique rather than trying to compete with the competition and what makes them unique. So really smart.
Right.
Okay, so let's get back to finance. When you decided to take Vizio public, it was a time when Vizio was on a tear. Sales were going well. Like we mentioned, Walmart was your biggest customer. So what factors played into the decision to go public? And then something you said earlier had me add to this question, like who brought it up first?
Yeah. No, I think credit to the founder. I mean, the founder, so Vizio was started in 2002 in Orange County, California, as really an early stage disruptor in the flat panel TV business. And by the time I joined, I mean, doing the math, I joined in May of 2020. They were only 18 years in their journey as a private company. But he understood that the next leg was going to be really around the growth of this, the proprietary operating system for the smart TV, which meant we had to, back to the point, hire a lot of engineers, software developers, create user experiences that we could bring value to the consumer, but also monetize. And that was going to be a big investment. And so the idea of being public was elevate the company's profile by getting in the zeitgeist of being a public company. You're going to get a lot more exposure, a lot more articles will be written about you. It elevates the awareness, and that itself could help us attract more talent, coupled with the things I mentioned on the previous question, right? So putting that all together was really the logic of doing it. It's tricky. I mean, advising companies to go public or not, it's a major consideration. It's a transformative action for any company. And you got to really make sure that you're ready and that it's the right thing for the organization. Most of Vizio's employees had never been at public companies, and so there was a massive cultural and learning curve that had to take place, which I spearheaded, having come from the public world predominantly.
Wonderful. That's a good answer, and nice to know where it came from and the reasons why a company might want to go through this. Clearly, a very tedious process. Okay, so thank you for sharing a bit about your business and your people strategies. Now I want to turn it over to a little bit more about you before we open up to audience questions. So you don't have a typical finance background for a CFO, yet you've had a highly successful career in the C-suite. So what would you say are some personal characteristics or professional traits that has led to your success?
Yeah, it's a great question. Sometimes I look back and be like, I don't even know how I got where I am. And in fact, there's a friend from college that's on this. I see him. Hey, Brent. Brent and I knew each other back when I was a biology major at UCLA and had no idea that I'd be a public company CFO someday. So that winding path has always been led by a core belief in continued learning, always be sort of intellectually thirsty and hungry, and opportunities sort of emerge along that path. I knew that I loved investing, I loved finance, I loved kind of looking at companies, but I wasn't sure where that was going to take me on that journey. But if you look back and think about going from, again, biology to Wall Street, to fintech companies, into media, to consumer tech, the common thread there is really this idea of curiosity, learning, and innovation. Every step along that way was going into an organization that was either going through a massive transformation on their own or was an opportunity for me to learn a totally new sector. And as I think about having had this successful exit out of the sale of Vizio to Walmart, I'm at that crossroads again of like, what's next? Do I go back into more of the same of what I've been doing, or is this yet another moment, another pivot point to sort of think about a different industry, a different sector, and really kind of scratch that curiosity itch?
Yeah, you brought up curiosity a couple of times, so I feel like that probably has been something that's followed you through your career, or some a characteristic of you throughout your career that's led you to success. The continuous learning, and you didn't mention it, but there's a lot of risk taking in that too, right? Going away from what you studied to just following your curiosity really allowed you to have the success. So thank you for sharing that. And as everyone knows, in my work, curiosity is something that I really hold dear. I really feel like it leads to lots of possibilities. Okay, so we do have a question in chat, and it comes from Joel. Comp commissions. What's a typical split for salespeople of commissions versus base? How have you dealt with changing someone from a higher base with a low bonus to a lower base with higher total earning potential, aka commission?
Yeah,
And Joel, you can
really
take that
tricky.
yourself off mute if you want to kind of go back and forth right now with
Yeah, no,
Adam.
thank you. You covered the question good, so I'll let Adam go from here.
Yeah, it's such a tricky aspect. It's probably one of the hardest parts of the job that I had in that, because we had a very large and growing ad sales organization, which is really tied to obviously commission. And trying to figure out the right commission comp plans was a constant discussion, because people have a lot of different opinions, right? And you want to set the bar high enough that they stay hungry and they're out working hard and not just waiting for inbounds and they can meet, a number. But you don't want to make it so high that it's disincentivizing, right? That they feel like we're never going to get there, it's never going to happen. We actually took sort of an interesting approach in the early days, because this business was growing from a pretty nascent level when I got there to now. I mean, I think we were doing $50 million in advertising, and most of that was like pass back revenue. It wasn't even from our ad sales team when I arrived in 2020. And now with Walmart, Vizio is going to do over $1 billion this year, roughly. My guess, it's not a public disclosed number, but my guess. So they're on that kind of trajectory. And a lot of that came from building a sales organization. And we probably overpaid in commissions early on, because it was so critical to the public narrative that we could grow that ad business, that we were willing to forego some margin in order to keep the ad sales team both growing and delivering. And so I was in constant conversation with our chief revenue officer over this topic. We created plans, and then we would revisit those plans halfway through the year and see how they were progressing against it, and then probably fine tune those plans on an annual basis, and reset the benchmarks and the floor levels, to make sure it was following the dynamics in the industry, but yet being realistic to the sales force, to make sure that they had an opportunity to really earn out. So very complex. Probably my least favorite part, because it's just there's never a perfect answer, but you're really going on sort of instinct and looking at the performance and trying to let that be your guide.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Thank you, Joel, for the question. And I see Bia has a question. Bia, you want to take yourself off of mute and ask?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for sharing your journey. It's really exciting to hear from Vizio going public with Walmart. Kind of seeing a little bit of a different flip of the story with some companies, and I just thought I would get your thoughts on it too. Seeing some companies going from public to private, and also there's a significant growth of influence, right, with private equity firms. So just kind of wanted to get your personal take on some of these, and maybe if that's something that you are even leaning more into as your next phase.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, we've been in a fortunate period of time where capital is accessible, right? And so what that's allowing companies to do, as you know very well, is either stay private longer or be willing to go private. Because one of the big benefits of obviously being private is always getting better access to capital, whether it's either or just cost of capital. Historically was superior if you could get to public company status, but I think that's changed a lot. And so you're seeing companies stay private a lot longer. It is something I'm considering now. I mean, when I look at my background and what I can bring to an organization, obviously the public company piece is really important, and it's a piece that can be highly monetizable, personally. It's less clear how you monetize yourself in a private setting. It's very different. And so that's something I've been thinking about a lot. But I don't think it's holding companies back from being able to grow and expand and make the investments they need to, because there's so many ways, whether it's the private debt market, whether it's private equity money, there's a lot of places to raise money. In fact, I just saw recently that Goldman Sachs is launching a platform for private companies that will tap into their high net worth individuals and family offices to allow those people to make investments in private companies and kind of buy in either early or just in businesses that maybe don't need to be public. That's yet another lever, another platform that's going to allow companies to think about alternatives. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see what the appeal is. And obviously being public has a tremendous work around SOX and all the compliance and regulatory elements. I mean, you got to add a lot of headcount to be public, and there's
I
major
think someone,
consideration.
I'm sorry, Adam, someone sounds
Oh
like
yeah,
they're not on mute, so you can put yourself on mute. And it does sound like there's a lot of innovation to be had there in with the private equity companies
for
moving into the
sure.
market. Okay, we have one last question. We want to move it along. So, Mike, I'm gonna have you come off mute, ask your question, and then Adam, I'm gonna challenge you to answer this in under 30 seconds.
I'm terrible at that.
No, thanks for sharing, Adam. I had a quick question. So just thinking about, because I've worked with a ton of companies after and candidates that, once a company gets news of an acquisition, it's hard to stay engaged. People freak out. There's a ton of turnover that happens. And or the other ladder, if they have equity, maybe they sit and stay for a while. But how did you kind of keep the Vizio team together and interested and engaged after such a big event, which is a good event, but for some others, they may see it differently?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, in our circumstance, they were going into a much larger company where I think people understood there might be new opportunities. So it wasn't like a dead end scenario for them. I think one of the important parts too was just communicating along the way and keeping people posted. I mean, I think when people feel like they're not in the know, they're not going to be in the know of every detail, obviously. But part of their importance in the journey is something I spend a lot of time articulating to them about, like how this is, where we're going, what they're going to learn from it too. I think a lot of people, I said, look, the worst case, you get this under your belt, having gone through, many of them were there before the IPO. So they've gone through an IPO, they've gone through being public, and now you're going through a major public to public M&A transaction. Your own personal narrative just gets enriched by that experience. And so if you stick with us through this and see it through, it's going to benefit you wherever you may go. And you may stay in the company and look for new opportunities, or you may take that experience and go elsewhere that's going to be really valuable for somebody else. So I think being realistic about the dynamics and not trying to hide anything from people, I think served us very well. And I think people were appreciative of that openness. And they saw that it was career enriching to go through the process. And then jumping ship early, you're just not going to get that experience if you leave too early. So we had very low turnover through it. I don't think we lost really anyone across. We might have lost one person in HR and benefits because obviously it was into the road for that kind of idea. But like I think most of our teams stuck it through to try to benefit from learning.
Right.
That was
I
more
think
than
the
30 seconds.
transparency, yeah, that's okay. I think the transparency really helps too, for people to know that you care about me, whether I stay here or if I choose to leave.
That's right.
Okay, so Joel, Bia, Mike, thank you so much for your questions. And I have one final question for you, Adam. So this one we're going to do a little differently. We're going to try a creative problem solving exercise called the worst idea ever. And here's how it works. I'm going to ask you a question. And instead of answering with your best idea, I want you to answer with the worst idea you can think of. Then we'll look at the worst idea and see there's actually something valuable hiding in it. Okay, you ready? Okay,
All right,
so here's
I guess
the setup.
so.
You've made a huge impact across your career in public companies. You took Vizio public and led a sale to Walmart before your exit. Now you're widening your aperture and thinking about what's next. So the first question, what is the worst idea you have for your next move? And wild and crazy ideas are welcome.
No, I don't know. I'm not gonna be that crazy, but going back to where we started with the chaos in the world, everything going on, I think maybe it's time to go get under a rock and just hide.
I love it. I'll be right there with you, sitting under a rock. Okay, so that's probably likely, if I'm your executive coach, I'm going to say that's probably not the best next career move for you. So let's look at that worst idea and change it. So looking at that worst idea, what's something in that worst idea or the opposite of it that might actually be gold for your next move?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, look, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is, I've invested the last 15 plus, almost 20 years investing in relationships across I know we talked about the journey, but like the last 15 years has been pretty tightly in the entertainment, media, advertising, kind of consumer facing world. It's all of my professional relationships, bankers, industry folks, vendors, people on this call have been largely in that ecosystem. And while it's exciting to think about new businesses or new parts of the economy, the future economy, right? AI, space, like all these things that are really up and coming. Like, can you really abandon that network and go take that leap where you have no goodwill, you have no knowledge, no one knows your background, you're proving you have to start over literally from scratch with a new industry. Like, how do I navigate that so that I don't lose my my connection?
Absolutely. So many connections that you have made. So rather than think about sitting under a rock, maybe you think about turning over all the rocks that you've already navigated through. So thank you, Adam, for being such an incredible guest. And thank you all for joining us on this CFO Focus live broadcast. This will be available to watch and share on LinkedIn and YouTube at CFO Focus. To learn more about upcoming CFO Focus virtual and in-person events, visit cfofocus.org and look out for more information about our upcoming CPO Focus programming designed for chief people officers to learn from one another. So that's our show for today. Feel free to connect with Adam and me on LinkedIn, and see you next time. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody.